Hello, my name is Apipol Setang. I am the academic coordinator from the International Academic Forum, and today I am in Incheon, South Korea, for our first ever Korean Conference on Education and Arts and Humanities. Joining me today is Professor Jennifer Andrus. Professor, could you introduce yourself for us, please?
Sure, I'm Jenny Andrus. I'm a professor of writing and rhetoric studies at the University of Utah in the US. And I'm a discourse analyst, so I study how language works and how people create identity through telling stories about themselves.
So, Professor, you just gave a keynote presentation, and it's titled A Translingual Approach to Language Ideologies and World Englishes. What is the concept of world Englishes, and how does it compare to so-called constructed languages like we have like 100 years or so ago, Esperanto, for example?
So world Englishes is the opposite of Esperanto. World Englishes is the idea that English proliferates, that people use English, people use any language, but English is this particular language I'm talking about, in lots of different contexts around the world in this case, talking to different people, doing different activities, so that language is about how it's used, not about its correctness. World Englishes encapsulates how many different ways there are to use language, to use English, rather than a correct way to use English. So instead of thinking about one correct standard, we think about the multiplicity, the blooming of language, the ways that English can be used in any number of beautiful ways. Esperanto is a constructed language, so it's about how to use, it has a really specific set of rules that you can learn and then employ. With English, it's developing all the time. So it's changing. When you use it, when I use it, after this conversation, we're going to go home, we're going to have different ways of using language because of this interaction.
Right.
So it's different. So language, natural language is interactional and will change based on interaction, whereas Esperanto is sort of static. I mean, it probably still has some flexibility because it is language and we do use it, but it will be far less malleable and flexible than English because English is used all over the world.
As an educator, what do you identify as the most significant challenges or so-called developments in this evolving process? And how do you or fellow educator respond to these challenges?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So probably the most significant issue would be dissonance. So as a teacher, we are sort of trained to want students to be correct.
Yes.
And students want to be correct, whatever that means.
They get the point.
Exactly. They want
Yes.
to give you what you want, right? Yes. So the hardest thing, but then I know that correctness is a fantasy. Correctness is a myth. That nobody speaks English correctly 100% of the time. Me, you, right? Maybe you more than me, but who knows? So when the dissonance comes is that when I know that correctness is a myth that we tell our students to keep them in line, to make them fall into the standard, the norm, but I know that that's what they want, and I know that's what my school expects me to teach. So there's a dissonance there. So I have to decide, will I be true to what I know is true about language, or what my institution wants me to do? And for me, it's always what I know about language. So I want students to learn from me that their language is their language, and it's beautiful no matter how they use it. So I don't want students to leave my class thinking that they were incorrect or that they did something wrong with language. I want students to leave my class knowing that what they did with language was creative and constructive and interactional.
In your abstract, you referenced language ideologies and their connection to social hierarchies and power dynamics. Now, do you perceive language as a political tool in contemporary society?
Absolutely. I think language has always been a political tool. Language carries power. So language does stuff. It's not just like a thing that exists that we sometimes employ or that carries meaning. Language itself is active. So think about this. Words, you've probably been in a situation where you said something and you didn't mean it to be mean, and the person understood it and they were like, why would you say that to me? That's because the word you used had meaning beyond what you intended.
Right,
words carry their own meaning. They have their own agency.
Right.
So that means they have power. They do things regardless of your intention. Words do things. So if language has power and politics wants to have power over you, then it's going to employ language in particular ways to be powerful. And so it sort of doubles down on the power of language. So politics can use language in particularly damaging ways. Depending on the goals of the speaker, I'll give them some leeway there, but they want to create a system of hierarchy.
How can language play a role in addressing today's pressing global issues, such as, for example, migration, refugee crises, or even within education?
That's a really good question. A couple of ways. I think that there's one way in that people are beginning, because of language contact, because we come into contact with people who speak different languages, people who speak a language come into contact with a new language and learn both languages or a combination of the languages, because that happens all the time in our globalizing world, we have to notice that language changes. We just have to notice that it's not stable. Unless we have blinders on or, we put something over our eyes, but we start noticing little by little by little, oh, language is about interaction. Oh, language, that's not always true about language. Or when this language gets into interaction with this language, then you have something new. Right? People start to notice the world around them in terms of language. So because of our globalizing world, we are sort of almost required, it's demanded of us that we start paying attention to language.
One last question. This is about something so-called emerging trend, AI. So have you explored the use of artificial intelligence in addressing these language ideologies? What has been its impact, or has it proven to be an effective tool in this context?
I was actually thinking about that when I was writing this paper. I haven't seen any research about it yet because it's so brand new and research takes a while to come out because of publication processes and whatnot. But I was thinking about a couple of things. So my students who are international are more likely to use generative AI in some contexts than maybe domestic students.
Right.
Or there's a language ideology that says they will because they don't have complete management over quote unquote English.
Right.
So people, instructors, professors expect their students of color, expect their students who don't speak English as their only language to cheat. Because they think, oh, they don't have language proficiency, they're going to go and try to find that information from somebody who does have language proficiency. It's not necessarily true. In fact, my experience as a professor is that everybody uses generative AI. I use it sometimes. I need to write a memo fast, I put it into ChatGPT. So the idea that, so part of the answer is that the idea that only some students of color are likely to use that tool because of quote unquote cheating. So that's a language ideology. There's an expectation that because you don't have facility with a language that's expected by the norm, that you're likely to cheat in order to get that facility with the language. The other part of that has to do with the creativity of generative AI.
Right.
So, and the pedagogical potential of generative AI. So let's say, for example, I am a student and I don't understand the writing assignment. I'm any student. I type the writing assignment into the web, to the ChatGPT, whatever, generative AI tool, and it spits me back a couple of paragraphs.
Sure.
Well, I just learned something from those paragraphs.
Right.
So I read those paragraphs, I thought to myself, that wasn't right, my professor said this, not that. So I start using that creatively. So it can be a pedagogical tool, it can be a creative tool, and I think that can be especially true for students who speak multiple languages. I think it can be particularly true for students who speak one language. So I think that there's linguistic potential and kind of fun and creativity in generative AI.
Right, thank you so much. I think that is a very, very nice conclusion. It's not about how we avoid AI, it's actually how we learn to use it.
That's right.
All right, lovely. Thank you so much, Professor.
you.
Thank you.